late. We've had some parking issues, which I'm sure none of you are surprised by down here. On behalf of the ARC Standing Committee and the Training Subcommittee, I want to welcome you all here.
His iPhone's in my...
We really appreciate your interest in this important subject.
Is he still there?
And I'm just going to say a couple of quick things, introduce you to our panel,
Okay,
and then we'll get started.
I have his iPhone in my office.
It's becoming much more commonplace, a commonplace experience to work with transgender individuals in the criminal justice system. Whether we work for the probation office, the district court, the U.S. Attorney's Office, Federal Public Defender's Office, U.S. Marshals, etc., we've encountered some specific issues that significantly impact these clients, including housing assignments in county jails and in the BOP system, access to medication while incarcerated, appropriate supervision techniques for probation officers, including procedure for random urinalysis testing with trans clients, and establishing relationships and developing rapport through the use of preferred pronouns and respectful language. So we're pretty excited to have an experienced and knowledgeable panel here to speak to those and other issues trans people are dealing with in the legal system. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about our three panelists, and then I'm going to turn the time over to them to tell you a little bit more about themselves and to continue the presentation. John Mejia is the legal director of the ACLU of Utah. He's held that position since 2012, and in that capacity he leads the organization's litigation and other legal advocacy efforts in defending and promoting civil rights and individual liberties. For those of you who have been around for a bit, like myself, John may look familiar. He served as a judicial clerk to Judge Campbell and Judge Waddops in this court. Danielle Hawes is the owner of Hawes Family Law. She's a solo practitioner in family law litigation, and all of her pro bono work is done in the LGBT community. Sophia Hawes-Tingey is a transgender Navy veteran and career software engineer with a master's degree in computer science and engineering. She comes from a military family and has lived in Utah for the past 10 years. So please join me in welcoming our panel.
Is it on now? Yeah. It is? That doesn't sound any different up here. That's wild. All right. I'm Danny Hawks. I am here at the bottom. I'm going to start us off and give a slideshow. I'm the only one of the three who still likes slideshows. Apparently they're going out of style, but I still think them. But I want to give us a baseline for transgender terminology, issues, a tiny bit of case law and legislative baseline, what's going on. And then the other two presenters, John's going to give more of a local, hands-on feel for what's going on locally here in Utah and different issues because he's embroiled in it every day. And then Sophia is going to give more of a first-hand perspective of the issues and sort of her viewpoint of how these issues play out. We're going to have a robust question and answer period afterwards. There's a break in the middle. We're not quite sure where that's going to fall in the conversation, but we'll just wing it. I should say, I do family law. That's all I do. So there's a lot of issues of transgender law that fall outside of the scope of family law. And so for those, we'll rely on these two professionals here. But I do really, really messy family law. So I do messy custody, messy alimony. I really like arguing and screaming a lot with people. So that's what I do all day long. The first place to start in discussing transgender issues is terminology. People get wound around this flagpole and can't get off of it to the point where we can even have a real conversation about what transgender issues are. So I like to start every conversation so we're all on the same page with terminology, with the understanding that we're all going to screw it up. I'm going to screw it up. These two are going to screw it up. Everyone in the room is going to screw it up. But at least we'll have an idea of what to learn and how to get better at it. So LGBTQI, we could add another Q, we could add other letters to this, but essentially what this is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex. And I'm going to break each one of those down. So lesbian and gay, we're all getting more and more familiar with. When I started giving these presentations 10 years ago, we would have to break those terms down as well, bisexual down too. But now we don't have to do that as much because of the progress that the queer community has made. Lesbians love women who love women, gays are men who love men, bisexuals are people who love both genders. Transgender, I'm going to break down a little bit more as we go along. But here, sexual orientation is who a person is attracted to sexually. So those are the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and asexual terms there. And then sex is the biological characteristics. So the term that falls into that category is intersex. Intersex, the old term that's no longer used and no longer appropriate to use would be hermaphrodite. But it's when someone's biological characteristics are either mixed or ambiguous. So we have mixed chromosomes, we have ambiguous genitalia or mixed genitalia. So that is not the same thing as someone who's transgender. Those are biological characteristics. Gender identity is a person's internal psychological sense of being male, female, or other. Transgender, genderqueer, and non-binary are the terms that fall under this category. Okay? Transgender, we also use the word trans, and that's fine to use, is a term for people whose gender identity and expression is different from those associated with their assigned sex characteristics. For example, the genitalia and chromosomes look this way, but their gender identity and expression is over here, right? So it's not the same as intersex, where we're all the way over here at sex characteristics, going different directions. Does that make sense? So these are two different things. Transgender is not a verb. You do not transgender someone, and people are not transgendered, right? They didn't get it. It didn't happen to them. You just say someone is transgender. They are transgendered. And transsexuals is an outdated term, and it confuses gender with sex. But I do have a caveat here. In the community, out on the street, stuff like that, I would never use the term transsexual, but transsexual is still used sometimes in legal jargon, so you have to be careful with it. I try and take it out wherever I can, but sometimes it's in statutes and things like that. Transgender is not the same as transvestite, crossdresser, or drag queen. For those of you who know Latin or Spanish or anything like that, we know that transvestite is transvestir, to dress, right? So transvestite is the same as crossdresser. Those both have to do with clothing, and these three terms also have to do with performance, right? So that's different than someone's understanding of their gender, right? It's a fundamental difference there. Sometimes people who did cross-dressing come out later as transgender, but those are two different ideas, and it's two different ways to understand where people are in their transition or life. The term transgender has nothing to do with sexual orientation. So I like to tell people, I actually had this told to me and it made a lot of sense to me, that sexual orientation is who you go to bed with. Gender identity is who you go to bed as, right? They are not joined in any way. So someone can be transgender and gay, someone can be transgender and straight, and they have nothing to do with one another psychologically, and the science doesn't show that they have anything to do. In my experience of working with transgender clients, it goes every which way, right? Has anyone heard the term cisgender? Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so if you're talking about whether a transgender person is gay or straight, is that based on the sex they're born as, or the sex
It's a
that
good
they
question.
identify as? So
It's
a
a
man
good
who
question.
identifies as a woman who's interested in women is he a lesbian?
Yeah. So the question is when you're talking about a transgender person and their sexual orientation, is it based on their target gender or the gender that they were given at birth? And the answer is it depends on the person, and you should just ask them, And I'll talk about asking questions, because this is a place where you definitely want to be in a position where you're raising hands, asking questions. And I have a whole slide on it, because most people won't do it, so bravo. But the bottom line is, it depends on how the person identifies, right? I could give you a rule right now, and then a transgender person could walk in and say, that's not how I identify, so, right? So my rule will be broken. So yeah, I think, I'm trying to decide if I want to add a story here. I think I do. So I work with a lot of transgender people doing their name and gender changes. I try and do them at low bono cost, but I do them for free if people can't do them, if they can't pay. Because it's really important to me. It's found that when people can do a smooth transition, they do much better in the community, they do better psychologically, so I want to be a helpful part of that. And so I had someone come in, and they had never heard of transgender before. This full beard, literally army fatigues, and had never heard of this before. I came in shaking and nervous. I was like, what is happening here? I don't know what this is. And as we got to talking, this person wanted to talk about transitioning to female and the female name, and had just seen it on the TV, and explained to me that they had felt so deeply inside since they were 4 or 5 years old, this strong feeling that they were wrong, something was wrong with them. They knew they wanted to dress as a girl. They passionately felt from a very young age that they were a little girl, and they knew that that was wrong and bad, but they didn't know anything else about it. So I was excited because I was like, you've come to the right place. Like, I can talk to you about what this might be. I'm not a psychologist. Maybe I'm wrong, but it might be this. And they were so excited about it and so interested in it. They weren't part of the queer community. But it clicked for them. They finally felt like they had belonged. The interesting part of this story is at the very end of the consultation, they started talking about their girlfriend. And I said, wait, so are you a lesbian? And they just broke down crying, because they just said, I have never had anyone get me that way. And they said, I think I am, just shaking, I think I am a lesbian. So they didn't even know if they were lesbian or not, right? It's a very complicated moment in someone's life. It's a transition process, but it's a really good question. And these two are going to correct everything I say, because I just say a bunch of stuff wrong, so if I say a whole lot wrong, they're both going to fix it. Gender non-conforming or gender queer is a term used by some individuals who identify as neither entirely male nor female. These are people who don't swing from one end to the other, but they're also, some of them are people who swing closer to the middle, and then some of them just want to throw out the entire gender paradigm entirely, right? These are the youngsters coming up there, so you've got to get ready for this argument. We're going to hear more of it. It's really exciting and interesting. I love it. I love when rabble-raisers come around and start doing interesting new things. I think we're going to hear more of this. Okay, so we say trans man and trans woman. These are fine terms to say. We also say FTM or MTF, so that's female to male or male to female. I've always wondered how these terms hit transgender people, so I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. But so it'd be a transgender individual who currently identifies as a man, or a transgender individual who currently identifies as a woman. Then the transition, I talk about the transition a lot. The transition is a really important moment in a transgender person's life. It can be 6 months, it can take an entire lifetime, right? Everyone has their own story, but the transition is the process of altering one's birth sex to match one's gender identity and expression. This is not a one-stop procedure. So in state court, when we're doing name and gender change, sometimes I'll have a judge ask me, have they had surgery? And I have to explain, there's not surgery, right? There's all sorts of surgeries that can happen. There's also psychological steps that are taken with a psychologist or a therapist. There's also electrolysis that can happen. There's Adam's apple, Adam's apple changes we can do, facial reconstruction surgery, chest surgery, we call bottom surgery, right? All sorts of different things. There's speech therapy that people can go through. So there's not one thing, you don't walk into an office and come out transition, right? It's a very long process for some people, and sometimes it never is over. The exact steps vary from person to person. They vary from based on spiritual needs. I've had a client who spiritually did not want to alter their body, but nonetheless, they had all of the same characteristics of being a transgender person, but they did not want to physically alter their body, right? And the judge was just fine with that, understood that very well. Financial resources is huge. A lot of insurance companies don't cover any of these procedures, and they're extremely expensive. And they're also more expensive depending on what your target gender is. So that's tricky. And then also some of the procedures are not good, right? Some of the procedures are experimental, and some people don't want to do an experimental procedure. Some of the procedures are well-founded and have been done over and over again, and some have not. And then physical needs. So I have a lot of clients who are elderly, right? And they're just finally sick of being in the closet, and they're throwing caution to the wind and finally going to live the way they want to, but they're too old for any procedures or any invasive procedures, right? And then also people who are diabetic or things like that. Okay. Are there any questions? We're kind of done with the terminology piece, so now we can all just move forward and screwing it all up. Oh, yeah, sorry. That's really important, thank you. Cisgender is right here. I did not mean to skip it. Cisgender is the term for people whose gender identity and expression is congruent with their sex from when they were born. Cis is the Latin prefix. We're on the same side. So they're, instead of it being opposite, they're congruent, right? So the majority of people in our community are cisgender. They don't know that they are, but they are.
If you're old, is it offensive to go use that term to refer to yourself?
I think that
That way. Is that offensive? You know,
the question is it offensive to not see yourself as cisgender? I think this is my personal opinion. There's so many offensive things in this world of transgender and LGBTQ rights that, like, we can find something that's offensive in any of it. And I just prefer to stay out of that space so we get a nice open conversation. I'm not offended. I don't care how you identify. I don't care how anyone in the room identifies. So I guess my answer is no, I'm not offended. Respecting one another. This is really tricky, and I think a lot of us are very good at doing this because in our professions, we are people profession, right? We deal with the whole community. The people who walk into our offices, in our courtrooms, and in our courthouses are all walks of life. So we're already really good at this. But we want to use respectful terms, and here's the reason why. So I've given this presentation to nearly every judge except the federal judges in the state of Utah. And there are judges who disagree, and they don't feel the same way I feel about LGBTQ people, right? That's fine. But there's a really good reason we still want to be respectful of them in courtrooms, and this is it. So I'm going to give you, I'll go through the bullet points and then I'm going to give you a story. So it helps courts and professionals avoid the appearance of bias against LGBTQ parties and children. I've also given this to the guardians ad litem. Those are the attorneys who represent children, so that's why children are all listed here. It allows parties and children to focus on the law and the facts rather than the judges or the professionals' personal beliefs or opinions. And so I just want to stop at that point and give you an example. I had one transgender client in a custody case. And like I said, we do really, really messy custody cases. My clients are not the good, cute, parents who are like doing all the board games and like making cute lunches, right? Those are not my clients. My clients are not parent of the year. So this particular parent was struggling with alcoholism and was not having it from me. I'm really hard on my clients. This person would not let me counsel them about how we needed to do some treatment and get clean because that's going to help their custody and parental rights. No. The only thing this person was focused on is, was this judge going to discriminate me because I'm transgender? And I had no idea, right? Because I had no idea until I walked in the courtroom what's going to happen. But I could not talk to this client about drugs and alcohol before I walked in that courtroom. This client was completely obsessed with whether they were going to get a fair shake in court. And so, and for good reason, right? I think I meant to look up this quote, so I'm going to just botch it right now, but I'm going to go ahead and give it a wing. There's an idea in social justice realm that if you can't be focusing on what the general public thinks is important when you have a noose around your neck, right? The only thing that's important to you in that moment is the noose around your neck, right? So for a transgender person, I can understand why the only thing that would be important to them is whether the court was going to see through that issue. So we get into court, and the court, from the very first moment, does it exactly right. Uses the person's preferred pronouns, uses their preferred name. My client immediately sees that this judge sees them. And when we walk out of that, my client got ruined in the orders. They got crappy custody, crappy parent time. We had a review hearing to see if we could fix it, right? My client didn't care. My client walked out of there just elated. That judge totally gets it. That judge totally saw me, used the right pronoun. Can you believe she used my right name? Right? And I was like, okay, now can we talk about drugs and alcohol? Yeah. Let's talk about drugs and alcohol. Okay. Right? So it helps me as the attorney to get to the real issue, the issue that's impacting the children is drugs and alcohol. It helped me in that case get to that issue. So we refer to if you want to create that air in the space you're creating, if you'd like to create that space, then the key is to refer to transgender people by gender identity rather than their birth sex, right? So their target gender is generally, if they're taking steps to be in that target gender, then it's probably their desire that you use those pronouns, right? For example, if someone put on lipstick today, you did a whole lot more than I did to be female today, right? So I'm going to use feminine pronouns with you. If it's not clear how a person should be addressed, it's okay to ask in a confidential and respectful manner, right? This is the scary moment. This is when you have to raise your hand. It's scary, but it's helpful because the person understands that you're trying to do it. You're trying to do a good job, right? And then, like I said, you get it wrong sometimes. I want to highlight the vulnerableness of transgender people in our community. There's a reason I do all of my free time in the LGBTQ community, and right now in almost only the transgender community. The reason I spend all my time doing that is because, from my perspective, there's some of the most vulnerable individuals walking around among us. Especially transgender women of color are incredibly vulnerable to violence and attacks and murder around the country if we watch the headlines and be honest about it, right? Transgender people the rates of discrimination for employment, housing, and public accommodations. Public accommodations are going to be like our restaurants or Nordstrom's or something like that. I don't think Nordstrom's has a problem. Like, just the first thing that came to my mind. But this rates of discrimination for transgender friends is astronomically higher than for us. The rates of bullying of kids, but also of adults on the street is almost nonstop, right? Suicide is a very difficult problem in the transgender community. We hope, and I think the psychology bears this out, that if a person can successfully transition and have a supportive community waiting on the other end, the rates of suicide and suicidality go down. So I hope, I try to be a stepping stone on that path towards there, but when we're on this path over here of non-acceptance and no transition and nothing, there's a huge, extremely high rate of suicidality Then physical, sexual, and verbal abuse, homelessness, and survival sex, the rates are higher in the trans community, and lack of access to proper health care is huge. My wife is a physician, a gynecologist, and OBGYN, and she spends entire days, she has to cancel entire days of clinics to sit on the phone with healthcare, with insurance companies, just to get medically necessary surgeries to happen. So the healthcare issue is a huge problem. The WPATH, this organization has been my touchstone in knowing what I know. So I think it's really important idea that I learned from social justice, reading and things like that, that we educate ourselves, that we don't rely on the community to educate us. And so what I've done and what I found extremely helpful is going to this website. They have a ton of information about what it means to be transgender. The most up-to-date scientific studies are at this website, and really easy to read articles. I'm like a little ADHD about things, and so I can just pop on there and read a little bit and learn something. So I think this is a really helpful website and organization. This organization put together the standards of care for transgender people. So every medical section has standards of care, right? So for transgender people, physicians and psychologists follow standards of care. They don't just wing it like I do. They actually follow protocol. This is the organization who creates that protocol and studies it. The protocol or the standards of care are, the doctors and psychologists have long found positive outcomes from smooth transition processes. So when someone can't transition or has hiccups in their transition or finds no support at the end of transition, that's when we see them in having trouble, and that's when I see them in my office having trouble with their families. That's when you might see them having trouble in the community in other ways. Those who have smooth transition and then fall on the supportive community at the end do far, far better. Stunted transition can lead to extremely negative outcomes, such as suicidal attempts, self-mutilation. We see this in detention, right? Has anyone had experience with this? I'm not even in the criminal legal world, but I've heard that this is a major problem. Drugs and alcohol, attention, and connection-seeking behavior. So this is cool. Does anyone here know Valerie Health, Dr. Valerie Health? Okay, she's like the psychologist in family law. She's really, really smart. And instead of saying attention-seeking behavior, she's now started saying connection-seeking behavior. It's kids and adults who are trying to connect with other people and with their community, and if they can't find that connection, they'll act out so they can get that connection, right? So we'll see that in our courtrooms, right? If they can, my client who started hearing the pronouns that made them see that the judge was connecting with them, instantly calm down. And then antisocial behaviors, we can see that too if they're missing that connection. Proper transition can ameliorate or at least improve negative outcomes. So like I said, as a professional, my goal after reading this information has been to be a positive stepping stone in someone's transition process. Legal and gender name changes. Legal name and gender changes. These are legal in Utah and they happen a lot. So I think that you're going to start seeing it more and more. We are doing it quietly in courtrooms, but you're going to see the effects of that on the street. So the lesbians and gays, they started coming out of closets 20 years ago, right? And look how that went, right? A huge shift in public opinion and a huge shift on the number of people who know a lesbian and gay person. That same phenomenon, in my opinion, is now happening with transgender people. So you will start seeing more transgender people. They're already with us. We will just start seeing them more, right? It's not that they just will start existing more, it's just our eyes will be open to them. So name and gender change under Utah law, there's only one little, I'm going to explain this to you, not because we do it in this court, but it's going to be in the news. So I want you guys to know what you're reading. This is the only statute on it about it in Utah. And it really doesn't give the court very much direction at all. In fact, it doesn't even speak to the court. It just says when a court orders the change, then the Department of Vital Statistics should make the change. But it doesn't tell the court what to do, right? It specifically does not require surgery, which is helpful and important. The reason why the legislature took that out of the model code. The model code does say surgery, but the Utah legislature took that word out because, as we already discussed, there's no surgery, right? That's not a thing. So this is the statute I use to help people change their name and gender. The piece of this that you're going to start seeing in the news, you've already seen it in the news a little bit, is there's 2 courts out of Ogden, okay, who are denying these requests, saying that the statute is too vague to tell the judge how to handle it. Because the statute is vague, right? So that makes some sort of sense. I don't love it because it halts people's transition process, but nonetheless, the statute is vague and confusing. So right now, the Utah Supreme Court has been deciding what to do with this. They've had oral arguments well over a year ago on this case, and there's some belief, and I don't have any information on this or anything, but there's some understanding that the Supreme Court is trying to get the legislature to legislate it, so they don't have to make decisions on it, because the Supreme Court is generally not the one who's like, here's the requirements, right? And the legislature had a great bill last term that just mirrored the name change statute, so it was like the same requirements, essentially, the same procedure, and it was doing really, really well at the legislature and failed at the last moment, and maybe John has some ideas about why it failed. This piece I'm going to skip, and we're going to get to it on the next slide. Here. So that's name and gender change. The other legal place we touch down here is on anti-discrimination laws. So Utah has an extremely good anti-discrimination law that protects employment and housing, and it protects LGBT people. So they included the T in there. That was a big controversy. Like the gays and lesbians are like, don't include the T because we can win if it's just us, right? And the advocates, thank God, were like, no, include the T, let's go, and we won with the T included. So that was a really cool moment. And if you remember back in 2015, there were some activists who allegedly locked themselves in front of a legislative door and closed the legislature down, right? This is what they were fighting for, because up until that point, the Utah legislature had never let out of committee. They never even let out of committee a queer bill, a positive queer bill. They let out negative queer bills all the time. Bills that would hurt families like mine, they let them out all the time. But they never let out a positive bill. So the next session after that protest happened, that was called the Capitol 13 protest. All those people got misdemeanors, and they did plead avances to misdemeanors. But after the next session, they not only let out the anti-discrimination bill, but it passed with flying colors. So it was really exciting, and since that moment, the legislature has been willing to consider both positive and negative bills. So it was a really exciting moment for the community. I just realized when I said that, I didn't explain the word queer, and none of you raised your hands, which concerns me that you're all asleep, because the word queer is very weird, right? Like, why am I using that? My dad would just be mortified. But the word queer is a term, out of LGBTQI, all those things. It's a term that was originally used against our community as a slur, right? You're queer, you're weird, you're bad, and it was often used in connection with violence against us. And so the younger community, I guess we're not that young anymore, unfortunately, I'm almost 40, but the younger generation is trying to take back that term and use it as a positive, and so I subscribe to that idea. But I also like the term queer because it's the only term in the alphabet soup that doesn't tell you who I sleep with or what my genitalia is. right? So that's why I use queer for myself. I'm a renegade, and it's none of anyone's business. Okay. So the anti-discrimination is going to start heating up in the news again. These cases are going to fall in your guys' courts. Thank goodness, because they're far too complicated for me to handle. They're really, your guys' cases are strenuous. The anti-discrimination issue, so Utah is fine because we have the state law that protects us, right? But federally, other states don't have this law. So the question is whether the federal laws that include protections for sex, if the word sex includes gender identity and sexual orientation, right? Those cases have been decided in Price Waterhouse was a case back in 1989 that said an employer cannot discriminate against a female worker for not being their brand of feminine. This is a woman who wasn't wearing makeup and heels. The employer told her to get with the program. She didn't, got fired. That was ruled unconstitutional. That's clear sex discrimination, right? Then the federal appellate courts around the country have been deciding whether that case extends to gender identity and sexual orientation. 10th Circuit is us, Ed City versus UTA. That was a transgender Utah bus driver who transitioned on transitioned, and then on her bus route, bus drivers, I don't know if you know this, but bus drivers on their routes, they use public restrooms. So they park their bus and then they use like a 7-Eleven bus restroom. Well, she was she was not able to go to the restroom, and the UTA fired her for that, for only being transgender. And that was upheld. So the 10th Circuit said that's fine. You can fire her for that. Other circuits have disagreed. So 11th Circuit, 6th Circuit have disagreed. This issue is now in front of the United States Supreme Court. Oral argument was in October 8th. There are 3 cases before the United States Supreme Court right now, and they're being decided. The first one is he was a child welfare worker, so we can all identify with him. And he joined a gay softball league and was fired because he joined a gay softball league. The second one is a skydiving instructor and had mentioned or had made known their sexual orientation, was fired because of that. And the third one is a funeral director who transitioned on the job, he was fired for that as well. The second one, as a woman who's married to a woman with 2 small children, I can just tell you, it is impossible. I would have to work very hard to not let the people around me know that I'm a lesbian, right? Because, I talk about my kids, and the kids are exhausting, right? My wife is exhausting, and she's exhausted, and we talk about each other all the time. It would be hard work for me not to talk about that. So sometimes I hear, from my family, and my family doesn't do this anymore, but they used to, why don't you just shut up about it? Why don't you just stop? If you guys all just didn't talk about it at work, then you wouldn't get fired at work. I'll just tell you right now, it's just not possible without a lot of extra lying and work. So I'm going to talk really quickly, and this is coming up in military service right now. There was a tweet that after consultation with generals and military experts, the U.S. government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the U.S. military. None of us have any idea what that means. There are so many transgender people serving in the U.S. military. We have no clue what that means. Do they have to pretend they're not trans now? Do they have to go back in the closet or untransition? Nobody knows. So these people are now just living in fear, and we have no idea what's going on with this policy. Maybe John knows more, but I don't. I've already talked about that. I'm going to hit this slide, and I'm going to wrap it up because I don't want to take too much more time from the other 2 presenters. Hugh Salt Lake in September of 2019 talked about a 20-year-old transgender woman from Utah was brutally beaten after using a women's bathroom at Oregon Coast Park near Newport. The assailant struck 10 blows which shattered her jaw in multiple places and fractured her skull. He kept saying, "Oh, you think you're some kind of lady. Suddenly you punched my face and grabbed my hair." And then these two are statistics about how frequent this happens for transgender women. I just want to make it really clear, regardless of anyone's position on trans issues, it's abundantly clear through statistics and stories like this that transgender people are incredibly vulnerable to violence. So anything we can do to help protect our privacy in court is helpful, right? So if we need to ask what pronouns to use, it's helpful to have to call people up to the bench instead of asking it in an open courtroom. You can do an in-chambers conversation about what terminology we want to use. We just want to be really careful about people's privacy on this issue and respect the fact that when they walk out on the street, they're really vulnerable. So that's all I have. Okay, we'll take a break now, and then these two.
Mention I'm the legal director of ACLU. I'm not as much of a standard. I actually would have had a PowerPoint, but I didn't really realize I'd have much time today. So, as Danny mentioned, at the ACLU of Utah, we do, on a daily basis, hear about many civil rights issues, individual liberty issues, and people facing difficulties with government agencies, all sorts, transgender people. It's a very common complaint. So I just want to talk about some of the most common complaints we hear at our office and some of the work that we do to try to help that. So we hear a lot from actually as young as elementary school families who have a transgender student and they're having issues with making sure that their student feels safe and making sure, I mean, the biggest issue is usually in elementary schools, is usually around bathroom usage. And, you know, I'm thinking of one particular student who was told that she would have to use the teacher's bathroom. And so she didn't feel comfortable using the bathroom at school, and she would start calling in sick or start holding and start, getting UTIs because she wasn't using the bathroom. And so, there's not a lot of litigation to be done in that kind of circumstance. It's just very, very complex, not just legally, but also for the families. And so in those cases, what we generally do is try to work with school administrators to make sure that those students are safe and those students are properly accommodated. So we have more luck with some school districts than others. I mean, I know of schools where they just accommodate the student with no problem. You don't even have to ask. And then there are other schools where you have to work long and hard with the school administrators to try to have a solution. So those are just constant conversations that we have with schools and school districts and administrators. And we definitely work with other local partners like Pride Center and Equality Utah and T and other community organizations, because a lot of that is about changing conversations and changing school policies, because again, although I'm the litigator and I love to bring cases, that's not exactly the right place to bring a case always. We also hear from high schoolers who are having problems, trans kids in high schools. With, again, not always a legal case to be brought, unfortunately for me, but an example would be a trans girl who they insisted that she wear a suit in her senior picture. Or a trans student who has clearly stopped using a name and the administration insists on using that name. They're in the yearbook under the name that they don't use anymore. Call it dead naming. So a lot of those are the kind of issues that we see in Utah elementary and high schools. The U of U, if you go to the colleges, they're a lot more progressive. Like the University of Utah has a transgender health center and is very supportive of their trans students, as far as I can tell. So that's sort of our school education work that we do in Utah. We also hear a lot about transgender issues or issues with transgender people in jails and prisons. And, you know, we work a lot with, so there are 26 county jails, 2 prisons, detention centers. And, you know, we work a lot with people who have been incarcerated or in pretrial detention, and they have safety issues around where they're being housed and whether that coincides with their gender. There's also a problem, and we try to work with it when somebody is in a transition and is taking medications that are related to that transition, like hormones, and are not allowed to continue taking those medications. And as